startup in the law space failed in a certain sense, in that I found out that clients didn't want everything to be flat feed, and that there was no hourly rate that was low enough to make everybody happy, especially for startups. And it was a sad, sad thing, because I really tried to make that work. And I think actually it could have, but I got sucked in-house by one of my clients at the time that was in the commercial enterprise space, and it built custom platforms for businesses that just had like old school websites and needed to create like robust user portals at the time when all of that was going down, and then got sucked into fixing the healthcare.gov ACA website when that launched and failed. And at the time, it was the first time that a federal policy was going to live or die based solely upon whether the tech worked right. And when it didn't, at that time, the Obama administration who put it forward was very concerned that this seminal policy was going to fail, and that all healthcare offered by the government outside of Medicaid and Medicare was going to be shelved for another 25 years. And so they pulled in a SWAT team of folks from Google and their campaign, and various like Silicon Valley startups, and then our team from the Presidential Innovation Fellows program, into a room, built a company out of it by proxy over a couple of weeks that just fixed the site in like 3 weeks, did it for like $50K, which was ridiculously well priced for a federal site of that size. And that company was one of my clients, and then became one of the companies I helped scale. So I was COO of that company through their growth phase. And before that, I've had a product company before I practiced law that I scaled up and as a startup, got venture capital for, and then sold the product. I've done that. I've been on the team with many other companies as a COO or a director of operations or VP of operations in their growth phase. And I practice law now because I think it allows me to do all of that plus more, and that's more fun. I also love deals. And so I don't go to court. If I'm in court, it is a bad day for everyone. I just put deals together. I build things, I don't break them, hopefully. So that's what I do. So a huge part of my practice right now is this growing area of AI law. And I would say huge, even though this area of law is sort of like forming right now, because every one of my clients has become an AI company, or is about to, in the last year and a half, at really 3 years now. And so this is really relevant in my day-to-day practice. I sit at the intersection, like I mentioned. I'm a corporate attorney. I do a lot of mergers and acquisitions. I do venture capital financing. I'm outside general counsel for a lot of product-driven companies, whether that be in software or bioengineering or a little bit of pharma, some hardware, and also aviation, and a dash of entertainment and sports laws in there, particularly like the co-founders of Prize Picks are clients of mine. I represent them in all of their corporate matters. So this is becoming more and more relevant to every single one of those segments right now. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about what we're going to talk about today. And I have to too, because it's changing literally week by week. So I'm going to try to get you guys up to speed generally on what's happening, where the laws that might affect you if you're building any kind of product that incorporates AI or is dependent upon a service provider that has AI baked in. I think that's every single one of you now, right? So if those two things are the case, then I'm going to try to get you up to speed on where we are in the United States, and where you might have the existential threat legally come from that would affect your business. And then we can always talk about, like, break out with Q&A at the end if I'm efficient. So I'm going to try to be efficient, and here we go. I'm not taking any questions about me. You can ask me later. I guess the last thing I should say is I want to give a shout out to AJ, who's in the house still, who got me to talk about this topic for the first time, and now it's kind of an annual thing, so kudos to him and his leadership. Also, he is about to graduate. He's going to move to New York and try to create a shell house. So if any of you are in the same boat here or online and are thinking about moving to New York and want to create a shell house, you should talk to AJ as soon as possible, because he will be gone before you know it. I also want to give a shout out to Avi, who gave me the thick black marker, actually really essential to this whole talk, so well done. And then also to Oliver, who is our current Brave leader, who has the gravitas, sensibility, and knows when to leave the room so that he doesn't get too much love or hate. And so as we see now, I think he has accomplished that again. So thanks for inviting me back to do this. All right. So where are we? Okay, there were 3 reports that came out in the last 3 days that I want to talk to all of you guys about in detail, and I cannot because we do not have time. But one that I'm going to highlight is that there's the Stanford report that came out, I think today or yesterday, where they basically do a survey of all of the development and changes in AI across the country, but also the globe, but certainly focusing on the United States. And they're looking at both consumer, like products for consumers, but also for business. And some of the big, just to kind of frame where we are, like I said at the top of this talk, every single one of you is going to be affected by AI law because you're either actively building something with an AI backend or your service provider, a key service provider is using that now and has integrated that in. And so what the Stanford report pointed out was that that is the case. It's not just a feeling. It is 60% of American businesses polled reported that they have already implemented AI backends into some part of their core customer-facing infrastructure, not just in-house for their own enterprise users. And that is accelerating. Those that have started that process, 60% of those 60% said they're going to do more in the next year and a half. And then the rest of them that polled, except for maybe a very small single digit even, said they weren't looking at it or considering it. So this is the brave new world, right? For better or worse. I've been through a few different cycles of like major tech leap forward. And every time everyone rushes to adopt, and then like sometimes it kind of wasn't a great idea. In this case, it's just the cost efficiency is so great for using these tools that I think it's going to be impossible for every business not to incorporate them in some way in order just to keep up, or the fear, the FOMO of not being able to keep up on cost efficiency is real. So we can talk at the end about anybody who's like, well, what career path should I go into now? Because I get that question a lot from younger folks, and I have some thoughts on it. Like, we could talk about it, but everybody in this room is entrepreneurial, so the short answer to that is you're going to be fine because you're going to find a way to be useful. You have the tools already instinctively to find a way to be useful, and that's really what you need to do. Okay, so other things about the Stanford report, it really highlighted a theme that we are feeling on the legal side, on the policy side, on the boardroom world that I get to interact in, which is we are now, of course, because of the adoption of this technology, because of the rapid pace of its increasing efficiency as we see all of these models come out with updates, almost like weekly now, that this is now not only technology that hasn't been fully validated or vetted, but that needs to be used, but also that it is it's a global diplomacy and a global competitiveness problem. And what that means is there's a lot of pressure from my clients on the federal government right now to not put a bunch of new regulations in place that create speed bumps for this. And we have an administration right now, for better or worse, how you feel politically, that is open ears to that and has advocates in the actual appointees that feel the same way. So let's talk about what that means. So US laws of note. We had executive orders versus executive orders. We have the grudge match right now of executive orders that are setting the policy standards for how the federal government, all the way even affecting Congress to a certain extent, but every agency is going to approach putting laws in place that can either make it easier for everyone in this room to develop AI and deploy it rapidly into the marketplace or make it harder. Under the Biden administration, the executive order on AI was very cautious. It was focused on cybersecurity, on data privacy and data protection, on bias that could be in these tools. And it was basically reminding agencies that they need to come up with policies and procedures to validate that any adoption or regulation that enforces within their realm takes those 3 things into account. And that means more evaluation by regulators. That means more requirements for business owners in order how they deploy and build these things. I think a lot of people, even business owners, felt like that was maybe some good guardrails though, because there is just such a rush to get things deployed and out into the market and in use. And there is no incentive to slow that down. I personally talk to a lot of teams that are in San Francisco right now developing this stuff, right? And every day they're putting them out into the market. And I ask every one team, I say at some point, so how much did you bake into your inference, in your training, like any kind of ethics or, thoughts about cybersecurity or anything, and they're like 0. Like almost everybody unofficially says 0. We just have to get it to work. We're worried that every other team that we're competing with has built like an agentic layer on one of these backends and on these LLMs, and they have gotten theirs to work. And we are just trying to get ours to be reliable in a non-deterministic model of development. And that's really hard. And so all of my technology leads, my developer friends are saying, this is a totally new way of programming, not just because it's a new series of platforms, but because I can't just code it with commands to do certain things, X equals Y. I have to think how I can get a consistent result out of these agents without actually telling it do X and if Y happens every time. And that's just that breaks all of the training that you're getting in school if you're in a CS major. It's all deterministic in the classes that I'm aware of. And so it's a very difficult challenge. A lot of engineers are really having to rewire their brains about how to accomplish this task. It's not always successful, and yet you've got this crushing fear that we're gonna miss a delivery milestone and lose market share or not be able to fundraise. So there's just a huge disincentive to actually put all of those extra pieces in place that are gonna make potentially these more stable or less likely to have regulatory issues or lawsuits down the road. So we in the legal field are not happy about that because we don't want our clients to get sued or regulated out of existence. But I get it, right? I've been an operations person who has to look at the financials, and I know that sometimes you got to get out in the market and build things and try to fix them after you put them out there. So I don't know. I'd be really happy and interested to hear all your thoughts on that and like whether you're having a different experience in the actual building. But the executive order under Biden was very much concerned about this. And a lot of the business leaders that I talked to actually thought it went too far, giving agencies carte blanche to create a lot of regulations that would have a rubber stamp of approval from the president and the administration that were overstepping the bounds of their authority and creating too many barriers to getting AI out into the marketplace without having a lot of risk. Hence, we now are in the Trump era. Trump era executive order, very different. Trying to unblock barriers to getting AI tools out into the market, sweepingly telling the agencies you should adopt internally as many AI solutions for how you run your operations, and then also reward, in some cases, on RFPs and other bids, AI-driven applicants or proposal writers and different companies that are trying to get to be, through the procurement process, your vendor, a government contractor. I know Max has been posting up in the Shell Discord different postings of RFPs from the federal government and state governments that include a lot of AI backend. And this is gonna just proliferate. There's direct administration pressure to write more of those proposals and have more federal dollars go in that direction. So just a complete 180 from where we were before. And don't forget, under this Biden era, we already were saying as a developer community, it's too difficult to think about the things that this executive order wants us to think about. So under this era, I expect that even less is going to become part of like the software development lifecycle or like your methodology or framework. And I hate to say it, but I think it's going to keep a lot of my litigation friends in business like 5 to 10 years from now, when there's a smackdown from consumers. And so what do I mean? So if we're at the era now where we have an administration that's saying, let's actually clear the path and do less law that blocks AI companies, do we even have real AI law in the United States? Well, the answer is kinda. We initially, like one of the first things that came out under the Biden administration was a NIST AI framework. NIST also put out a cybersecurity framework that got adopted, fully implemented, and now, even though NIST doesn't enforce it and require companies to follow all of its rules and regs, it effectively is by the courts. And this is the cool thing about I think the law. An agency can say, we suggest something for a specific industry, and even though they don't enforce it at all, it becomes industry standard. As a result, courts will say, hey, some customer of yours, some consumer class got really harmed by what you put out in the world. And what should what should have been the baseline of what you should have put out? Well, we'll look at this suggested federal framework and use that as an example of what is reasonable or not reasonable, and boom, that one reference in a case makes that framework effectively law, because every insurance company is now going to want to make sure that you have that in place, that framework in place. If you're going to be insurable, every potential buyer of your business, if you want to exit and sell your startup, is going to go through due diligence and look that you met those requirements so that they're de-risked once they buy your business. So we had that with the cybersecurity framework. So when we saw the AI framework come out as a recommendation, and there was a period for people to comment, we thought we were going to move in that direction. This is now being surgically chopped up under the current administration. There's a lot of questioning about it. There's a new review period that's happening. So we'll see how this flows out. It is not enforceable law yet. So I would look at it if you're building an AI tool, because it's like kind of a good cheat sheet of where we might go regulatorily, as like just the minimum requirements of like how much security should you have, where should your data come from, how do you document that, you know, how much bias and what kind of bias is acceptable. If that's a crazy thing to say, but like what does that even mean, right? And so all of those things. This is kind of a cheat sheet for right now, and I know it's not fun to read, but you know, this is definitely a GPT. Get a summary of this maybe, and use it as a checklist, just to like validate that you can speak to the fact that you might even be compliant with that. But otherwise, Congress has not put out an omnibus AI law. The EU did, right? So the European Commission put out the AI Act a few years ago, had comment on it from all the different various countries, has largely had that adopted in most countries, and then this is the law of the land as far as enforcement when it is triggered in their jurisdiction for the European Commission. And what that means, and this is very, again, similar to what the Biden administration was asking for, and in fact, the Biden administration somewhat mimicked and echoed this, looking out for consumers, but this went further. This AI Act said, we're going to create classes of uses of AI, and we're going to call them different risk levels. And if it's the highest risk level to the community that it is using it, we're going to say you can't even build that. And if it's the second risk level, we'll say you can build it, but only with effectively government oversight and approval. And so the highest risk level would be something like deciding who lives or dies, you know, something like that, right? Like who gets patient care in a hospital, if there's like a shortage in a martial law situation. Like, we should not have AI making that decision. We should still have humans accountable for things that are life and death. A secondary level would be something like hiring or firing decisions in government itself. Also, things like parole. Like, should AI be deciding who should get parole because they're more likely or less likely to commit a crime in the future using predictive analytics? That would be something that would be a higher risk, and you'd have to get approval to do. Or things like deciding if someone's a risk for future illness based upon their existing health and their prior health history. And then we have there's two other levels below where most commercial businesses try to exist and live, that are medium and lower risk. And they have more or less documentation or filing requirements in order to just break into that industry and be in compliance with this law. Super burdensome, though, to have to go through these extra analysis steps, and also to make sure that you're otherwise complying with those cybersecurity, data privacy, and anti-bias requirements that across the board would apply in this situation. And so some companies that are global just will go look at this, comply, and then provide that same compliance level for their products and services across the world. And so this becomes a high watermark that they're already ready for. And in some cases, some of these biggest companies will then go back to the United States and say, we'd actually like the president and Congress to pass an omnibus law that's a lot like this, because we know we're ready and nobody else is. And we'll have 6 months to 2 years lead time to offer AI-driven products and services that otherwise would not be compliant unless you're like us. And that gives us a huge market advantage. And it just sort of clears out a lot of competition from being able to compete against you. So there's a little bit of that happening too, interestingly. But mostly, A lot of the Chamber of Commerce members are wanting more free, clear, fewer roadblocks. So this executive order also cleared out and actually reversed some AI protections that had already been put out by some of these agencies. But let's talk about some of what's actually happened already. That's good law as of today, in case this touches any of your industries. But I've done a lot of talking. Does anybody have a business right now that's in what you think is a highly regulated industry and has an AI backend? I mean, Max does, always. I don't even know which one he's going to talk about today, but for sure, because he's at the financial industry, right? He's often in some kind of quant related to finance. So I'm not going to pick on you too much unless you have a question, because I know you will. That's a good question. I think it depends on the volume of transactions and the type of consumer. But I believe it's going to be mostly the moderate. So you have like a higher burden, which is already true because you have securities law, so it sort of reflects that. But there's some companies are very much trying to surgically like only offer certain services that puts them in a lower category. So if you're kind of on the line, like that's definitely a strategy that we help with at the firm.
And also, I mean, maybe this is not something that's really involved yet, definitely not in the US, but like the implied authority of agentic models that for like asset managers, like they have fiduciary duty, and they're already sharing AI bots to do like trading and stuff. That's one thing, but like if someone like a Blackstone is utilizing back-end models and does something on the basis of those models, that's a lot different than a known tech-based quant firm doing something like that.
Yeah, although some of the arguments we hear are that they aren't that different, and so they should be regulated similarly, or at a lower level of regulation, or at least just like maintaining what is the existing level. My face is a little bit concerned about that because again, I get to spend a lot of time with teams and like I get to be like a test user for a lot of stuff before it goes out because of just the nature of my job and needing to like red flag review stuff and like look for risks. And I got to tell you, I haven't seen many models that are consistent enough to like not create errors that would cost a lot of money out in the market. And I think there should be a higher level of regulatory scrutiny for some of these. For the moment, if we can stabilize these agentic AI and like really get them tight, then and consistent and reliable, like as much as a human can be, right, which is not perfect either, then I would change my mind a little bit. But for the amount of rapid trading, like high-speed trading in particular, like we can move the market with an error in a very quick way. And so.
But what about the inverse, like the private equity, the really low speed, like the
yeah.
like Evercore came out and said that they had this crazy internal model for like LP secondaries.
Yeah.
They built with like their internal systems. This was a few years. This was probably before ChatGPT.
Right.
But places like that, how did they? Maybe this is not even like an AI specific question, but like
right.
balancing their internal models and tech that they can't directly justify like what the output is. They have like some sort of black box, but they are still fiduciaries of like not their capital.
I just realized not everyone can hear. So Max just asked a question basically about like the inherent black box nature of the algorithms, the math, the applications that run the quant world for finance right now. Those tools and those algorithms have been in place since the beginning of time. You can go pull really great Gödelian mathematic uncertainty loop math articles that were written in the 70s that were adopted by certain finance houses and were deployed. So I would say to you, the joke is that AI has been used, or some version, something that is AI, but like we didn't call it that, has been in use in your industry for 30 years, and now everyone else is using it, and suddenly we have to regulate it more. But that black box nature is inherently important into competitive advantage in the market, and that we've been somewhat comfortable with that in the securities regulatory realm for a long time, right? We haven't required that every element of how some of that magic secret sauce is being done is being disclosed and then publicly foilable. We haven't been doing that. So why are we changing that now? And so for the slower speed trades, this is what your real question was, I think that, that's a good question. He's asking me to be the decider, which is fun because I don't get to do that. Yeah, I mean, what does the law say? I think that the law hasn't fully caught up, especially right now when we're in a dismantling and remantling the SEC environment, when we're seeing the commission deciding what kind of commission it's going to be longer term. I mean, I know you've been watching this and posting about this too. How is this commission going to roll? Where is the enforcement going to be more stringent? Where is it not? The number one answer, though, is if we start seeing investors lose a lot of money, there will be more sunlight. There will be more regulation, right? And so if there's, and that's what's happening right now, right? A lot of investors are losing a lot of money in this uncertain market. And so there's just inherently going to be more calls for more oversight from that community, and we'll see whether this administration jumps to that because it's a lot of their funders, or doesn't care and has their overall economic plan and they're just going to push that through. I mean, I hate to say it, but the politics of the situation and the overarching economic policy of the situation might have as much effect on how the regulator in this specific instance acts as ever. So I don't know if I want to predict yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think no matter what, I think I'm going to be kind of wrong and kind of right, because it's just it's an unusual top-down situation, even for the SEC, which usually has a lot of autonomy. Go ahead.
So I'm not in finance, but I think for most startups, especially the ones that are come from shell, we're more consumer facing. And when looking at the EU and the way that they interact with AI, I think Apple is a pretty big example of the difference in regulation, because recently a lot of the big companies who may not Apple doesn't necessarily make native AI, or they don't develop models, but they have the distribution and they
have a skunk works team that is, but we'll put that aside. Okay, yeah, well, Matt Marks from Shell is watching and probably yes we do, but okay, yes, I hear you.
More of a recent development.
Yeah.
But essentially they have a bunch of distribution because people have iOS devices.
Yeah.
And so with rolling out Apple Intelligence, which is essentially their own little wrapper of ChatGPT that's a local model, they're not even able to offer it in the EU because of their requirements for reporting and regulation in general. And Apple was we didn't even want to deal with this.
Right.
And so for those of us who are making consumer-facing startups, especially managing data with services that are available online, how do you, not legal advice, but how do you perceive that developing, especially from the perspective of where you're even able to offer your service and do things or provide a service that operates locally, but because it uses AI, you have to then report information you may not have access to, or you may not have an infrastructure to robustly report and
Yeah. So I mean, this is the terrible part about being early in a developing technology realm. I mean, you have the risk that you could get slapped by a regulator as you succeed. It's most often once you start to succeed and you get a critical mass of their constituents, their populace. If you're using vendors that don't take into account all the jurisdictions that their customers are in and help facilitate your reporting requirements. What should soon happen and has already begun to happen is a lot of the larger brands that are service providers to you, that are the back ends, are trying to provide more, as part of almost their service, more of those compliance elements so that you can continue to use them in all jurisdictions. Now, of course, some of the biggest players are not doing that really well, and the law is changing, like I said, week by week, and so it's very hard for even them to get in front of that. But having been through 4 or 5 of these cycles of rapid tech development and leap forward, I see that as probably going to be the pathway, because it is a competitive advantage if any one of these vendors starts doing that and making your reporting really easy or your compliance really easy, or just even, and you don't even maybe not even care about it. You just see a checkbox on the list of features, international regulatory compliance based for our platform, and you're great, my lawyer's happy, or my COO is happy, or whoever, right? My insurance broker is happy. I'll pick that one even though it's slightly more expensive or the same price, and that will be just competitive advantage on legal compliance level. So I think we're heading in that direction, and if you can't find a vendor right now that is allowing you to comply with the law in the jurisdiction where you have users. I would love to hear that case story, actually. I would love to hear what suite of vendor services you're particularly having that problem with. So please come and talk to me about that after. Great question. Yeah?
Do the big four accounting firms exist in 20 years? And if
Ooh.
they do, is it just a no one gets fired for buying IBM type of thing?
Ooh, okay, so you said, the question from Max was, will the big four accounting firms exist in 20 years? And he had a second part, which we'll get to in a second. He said 20 years. 30, 40? Will any of us exist in 30 or 40 years? Like, seriously, right? Yeah, will we even be like an earth-bound society by then? I mean, there's a lot, I'm saying this as a 40 or something, right, person. This definitely, there's every era of my life, there has been rapid change in many sectors. And it always felt like this is the craziest time to be alive right now. And then this is the craziest time to be alive. And this is the craziest time. And how can society possibly react to all this change? We're going to fall apart. We're tearing ourselves at the seams. Every decade that has been said. There's been existential crisis in every generation preceding yours. We've all been through it. This is your turn. But truly, I actually graduated in the dot-com bust when it was the first like major adoption of software across the globe, and then software failed us and we thought Y2K was going to shut down our international systems and like stop all transactions, and then everyone switched their major in their senior year from CS to systems engineering as fast as they could because software is dead. No one is ever going to make software again. And that was 2003. So what's happened since then? Like everything has happened in software. So, and it's propping up our economy every 6 years before it plummets down again. So like, I mean, I think, but I will say that the number of industries, the number of parts of life that are all changing at like breakneck pace, CRISPR, AI, agentic AI and adoption of AI so broadly, so quickly. Financial systems changing, not only with blockchain, but just in general. Globalization coming to a head and now being pulled apart. We'll see if that actually slows this down. Medicine, the advancements in medicine we've seen in the last 5 to 6 years, like it does feel a little bit different right now. So I'll give you guys that. You get to be a little bit more like gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands. But quite frankly, every time I've seen these major crises or like existential threats hit, it is opportunity time. This is not the time to be scared. I'm sorry, we're still talking about AI law, okay? But just for a second, this is not the time to be scared. This is the time to say, oh, cool. This is the California gold rush, and I can choose to mine for gold or sell gold pans or build railroad tracks to deliver gold back to cities or whatever. What does this time mean? Because there's so many things. Like the entire infrastructure of all businesses was totally shifted with cloud. Like they had to redo everyone's like back end and like where their data live, and that was a small change compared to what we're doing right now, which is every back end of every piece of software now is a totally different logic. Like, what are we doing? We have to rebuild everything. So you guys are going to have to help do that in some way. You might not be the code monkey as a first year anymore, but you might, there's some other job to do there. And oh, by the way, we also are about to go rebuild everything again off-world in the next, 20 years? Like your peak career time, we're gonna have to rebuild all of human civilization, lift it up and put it off-world, like maybe on multiple places. Like, guys, you are so lucky to be coming into the world right now. There's just an unlimited number of things to do. And then all of the like awful things that come as a result of everyone trying to mine for gold. Like others of you will like help fix those things. So just like be optimistic, see the opportunity, whether people see like the down market, you buy by investing in yourself and like being thoughtful about what's gonna be needed in 20 years. And if it's the big four accounting firms, I think they're gonna continue to exist. I think they're gonna have a slightly different service offering. I think they're smart, very smart people they've sucked up over the last 40 years, and they're gonna be thinking and working very hard to stay relevant. Some of them might consolidate, some of them might go away, others will rise, but some of them are gonna still exist. They're just gonna be doing slightly different things. That's my answer to that. Should I go on with this, or does other questions? How much time do I have? I've got 1 minute officially. I'm going to keep going, though, for like another 10. Yeah? Yes. Yes, sir.
I just had a quick question. You mentioned before that you said that potentially big companies are trying to like throw their weight around to get the United States to like become more compliant with what EU.
A few, yeah.
Who would be throwing their weight around like that?
I mean, the ones that I know for sure are doing that are clients that I cannot give you a case study for because it's part of their corporate strategy and I'm bound by confidentiality. But I can give you generally an idea of which ones, and maybe you can guess. Any company that has invested intensely, expensively in building supply chain infrastructure globally, in building services delivery that requires both on-site and then like a large and robust software platform to manage delivery of service and monitor that it's compliant with local laws in every jurisdiction. Those businesses have put so much and invested so much, they have a vested interest to ensure that they protect those investments, if that makes sense. So there are some big consumer brands in that. There are also a lot of B2B brands that might be in that bucket. And just think of like the biggest companies in the world that have had to do that to stay current, and everyone's on their phone like, what could it be? What's the Fortune 100 top 20? But like, yeah, I mean, that's, and then, yeah. So I don't know if I should say more than that, but you can ask a follow-up if you want.
What would motivate the U.S. to take action on that, do you think?
To pass an Omnibus AI Act. Congress is trying, different factions in Congress has been trying for the last 3 years. There's a lot of segmented, smaller bills that have been debated that take slices of these things that we've been talking about, like on the consumer protection side, the cybersecurity, the data privacy, data protection, and the DEI kind of stuff. And then on the business side, things that would affect insurance, like things that are reflective of what we see on the state level, which I'll talk about more, like the Insurance Underwriting Act that came out of Colorado recently, is quietly a huge deal because what insurance protects defines what everyone else can sell. Because if you are not protected by insurance as a business, you're too much at risk and you're probably not going to sell that anymore. And that's just how it works out in the big world, right? And so whether you're at the top of the food chain and then you require all of your smaller vendors that serve you to also have good insurance to protect you serving that, or your customers who get your service or your product, they have to have insurance that covers them touching it. And if you don't have insurability that's really clear for your AI product, then it's radioactive. It's too risky to hold and to deal with. The liability pierces your general liability insurance. It makes your errors and omissions go out the window, your cybersecurity insurance, your cyber risk. You might create a backdoor in your business that allows like a huge ransomware attack that shuts you down, or your customer, and nobody wants that, and then to be told, oh, and my insurance company says you can't get any coverage for any of that. That's just coming out of your pocket, and now you're going to be sued by all your customers for your outage, and you have no insurance to cover any of that. That's radioactive in my world. Great question.
So that's something that's like widely available now, or are you saying that's something that is like
It needs to be further implemented. Like Colorado has passed an act that starts to clarify some insurance underwriting. Some members of Congress have put in bills that also try to clarify that. The insurance industry itself is trying to self-regulate and create some new standards and frameworks, but it's very patchy. There's actually competition about what insurers cover and don't based upon what their underwriters say the risk is. And so the AI framework can kind of go to this, like I mentioned before, by saying, this is an unreasonable exposure, this isn't, or this is the best practice for how you protect the back doors of your business or the financial transactions or et cetera. And if you're not doing that, then an insurer is unlikely. If you're not following something like this, then an insurer is less likely to cover you, or they're just going to charge you so much it's not affordable to get the coverage, if that makes sense. Great question.
I'm just thinking out loud. Like
Yeah.
That would be something that probably is more relevant to the Europe, like to the EU right now, right? According to
It's clearer because of this.
like companies are probably like U.S.-based companies, probably like because we're not as restrictive, probably wouldn't see as much of a need to invest in something like that because there's less of a chance of that being necessary.
So the question is, like, U.S. companies are less caring about insurance implications of AI use. Is that what you're asking for? Because unlike being in the EU, they don't have.
If you're not breaking laws, then like,
Yeah, if you're not breaking laws, then what's the problem? It's actually interesting. It becomes, in some ways, it's harder to deploy a product that does something risky in the US right now because there isn't a law that creates a clear backstop on how much risk you have by saying, if you cause this problem for your customers, the regulator will charge you $1,000 per incident versus potentially unlimited risk in civil court for every one of your customers to get together as a class and make you the test case for why what you did was abhorrent, and now you have to pay them $1 billion in fines and fees. The uncertainty in the law is your number one enemy. We hate it. We use precedents and borrow from prior cases, structures for rules, and we love that because it gives us something that we can point back to and show continuity, and we can predict the future a little bit more. My whole job is really to predict the future. I try to do it always from the countenance of like the most conservative approach and then tell you what your risk is and try to value it with you for anything that isn't the most conservative. But I'm predicting the worst case scenario in the future all day, every day, and then trying to help you decide whether you want to run at that head first or maybe pivot a little bit to avoid some of that. And so we hate uncertainty. And so in some cases, like those big companies, having the biggest companies that have already gotten in compliance with an omnibus act that is very stringent are happy because that means that they can predict the future in the EU. They know they're either in compliance or they're not. They know if they have risk with consumers or they don't, with regulators or they don't. And they're already sitting pretty. And in the United States, they would love for some more clarity. Smaller players don't want the clarity because they don't want any rule that makes them have to change their business. That's cost they don't have today. And their insurers are catching up. So in the US, ironically, it might be the insurance industry that actually effectively acts like a regulator by just saying, we're not going to insure this part of your business. Even though you're legally allowed to do it, the cost of actually doing it is so high, it's almost like a high-risk criminal charge, like in effect, how risky it is for you. Because financially it is that risky. You will have no coverage for doing that. So the good news is for all of you is that the insurance industry does lag in its savvy about new technology advance. And so the adjusters and underwriters are trying to catch up with all the risks that your industry has. A couple of bad cases, a couple of large damages claims for outages or issues, that will change. They're all going to have a data point that tells them, what you're doing is in that weird category that we now know is really risky, and we will never, ever, ever cover that again without you paying crazy amounts.
Like you just need someone to set the precedent kind of, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Either we have a terrible case that makes it expensive, or we have our government define where the risk ends for you. And so in that case, I'm actually saying, go regulator. I know it's crazy to say that as a corporate lawyer, but to a certain extent, creating a bound of risk, an envelope where it's not going to get crazy up here or here or here, and you know that your risk is just in here, is a lot better in some cases where it's just complete green fields for risk.
Like, do you know the ceiling of like how much it could cost?
Yes, we know the ceiling of how much it could cost. Exactly, 100%. You said that better than me. Go to the head of the class. What's your name?
Ari?
You said Ari?
Ari.
Arye?
Ari.
Arian.
Yeah.
A-R-I-A-N?
Y.
Y-A-N. Okay. There's been, Max, you obviously are always like near the head of the class, but we've got Arian, we've got this guy here, and we met before. Tell me your name again.
Bryce.
Bryce, Avi, you see that you're already here, right? Because you're the marker man. You haven't spoken yet, and I'm shocked and horrified.
I have a project.
So he's multitasking. He's not really here, guys. He's just his avatar. Okay, I'm way over time. Should I give you guys another 10 minutes on this? Just talk about states. Would that be useful? Yeah? Okay, you want to hang out? Okay, so states. So the federal government's somewhat silent other than just like fighting administrations fighting each other on like global policy on AI. We have the NIST framework. We're going to see how it lands. Department of Commerce was tasked with creating its own guidelines. It sort of started to under the Biden administration, but a lot of the enforcement that it was engaging in is now being rolled back cases that it was trying to put forth with DOJ support are being settled quickly. And the same is true for the SEC on a lot of different things that don't even relate to AI, but it's been fun. The FTC did create some guidelines on data misuse and has done some enforcement on data misuse. And so I think what the agencies there, and then also the EEOC have been doing is they haven't been calling it necessarily AI law directly. They've been borrowing data protection and data privacy rules that are already on the books and using those to kind of hem in what are the limits for AI back-end tools. So it's analogous there, right? So data protection laws on the federal level that are still enforced, still apply to AI tools, and maybe with a little more scrutiny because of it's the one spear that these regulators have to really kind of create some boundaries for AI back-end tools. What was I going to say? So the FDA also, if any of you are doing any medical devices, food products that are going to have to get FDA approval, there is a machine learning framework the FDA put out, and you should definitely take a look at that too. And feel free to reach out to me to talk more about it. There are people in my firm who just focus just on the FDA and are spending a lot of time on this, and I can give some better predictions if you have specific cases that relate to this. And then also, I'm an intellectual property attorney as well as all the other things I do. And the Copyright Office has just reaffirmed yet again that AI cannot be authors. So under copyright law, also under patent law, but for the moment, copyright law, there's a person who creates the work that can be protected, and then there's the owner. Those can be the same person or entity, or they cannot, right? They might be two different entities or people. So for instance, the classic example is when you as an employee make a work for hire, and you are the human author of something that's copyrightable or patentable, and then your employer is listed as the owner on the application to protect that for the ownership of that intellectual property. The Copyright Office has had a number of AI claimants trying to submit applications for works created, visual works, video, sound works created by AI, and trying to test this bound by saying, I gave it the most minimal prompt, the AI backend, the most minimal prompt possible, and I got this robust, amazing work. I did minimal editing to it, and so I'm going to list the AI tool as the author, and I will be the human owner, or my business will be the entity owner. And the Copyright Office has repeatedly said, we don't care that you as the human did very little. You are the operator of the tool. These things are tools. They are deployed, but for the human telling it to deploy, it's not going to happen. But more importantly, humans have to be authors, and that's how it's going to be. And if you look at the Copyright Act, throughout all kinds of different clauses related to not only ownership and authorship, but also to how we even evaluate that a copyright has arisen. It's just really baked in to how that whole act was drafted, that a human is doing certain things at certain times. And so I think they're worried they're going to have a new act put in place. And then the implications of drafting that for all of the edge cases that could come out of that, it's just, the Copyright Office does not want to do that. They don't want to put that forward. They don't want Congress to do that right now. They want to say, this act is dependent upon human authors it is. Yes, sir.
So this goes more to like AI use cases, but recently, and this is a Twitter thing, Jack Dorsey, who founded Twitter, he put a tweet saying, remove all IP law, or something along those lines.
Right.
And I think that as like more people, I think from a developer perspective, if you make a software and you've used something like Cursor or like one of these AI tools to build it, how do you then navigate the intellectual property of the end product, even though there may have been some assistance, and also going forward, we've also seen where you can use AI to do things that are supposedly human-made, like Midjourney, to make some of these creations. And so I wanted to know, from that perspective, how do you see that moving forward, especially as the line gets blurred between I prompted this and I created this, and also against what make it fed into it to generate a certain result or outcome. Like with some of the new GPT-4o image generation, people are making new things, but the inspiration is purely like from a certain studio or a certain like
Studio
company that is,
Ghibli.
like,
Yeah.
So, like,
Okay, so Bryce got an extra check mark. He just gave me the layup to like my segue to my next part of the talk. Anyway, I'm going to try to boil this down. So Bryce is saying, hey, I'm a developer. I use Cursor. You know, me and my buddies on a Friday night might just prompt an AI, or not even like do some back end development to try to ask an AI to build a company that builds IP, and just let it run. And it has a CEO. We tell it to have a CEO, and we tell it to have a bunch of developers, and we tell it to have a bunch of artists, and we have a finance guy, and we just tell it to go and build, and a marketer, and we tell each of those roles what they should be, and then it just goes and it just builds intellectual property that is licensable and saleable in the market, and then we deploy it out in the world, and it's going to just go sell those on like Etsy or any Facebook marketplace. And we did not even prompt anything about what those works would be. We didn't even say what genre they should be in. How can you say, Copyright Office, that the human is the author of those individual works? And I actually was at the Shell alumni retreat, helped organize it this last year. It was awesome in Palm Springs. And we actually had a team do something similar to that, where they built an AI company that goes off and does something. And we let it run for a while, and we checked up on it, and it was really funny. And it built some cool stuff. In that case, it was just code and some apps. But it's very, you can see up close what these can do if you know how to, as the prompt engineers and the inference engineers get better and better at this. The Copyright Office is always going to trace back to the human, or at least I shouldn't say always, for the time being, is going to trace back to the human. They might even say everything created by that app layer that you put on top, that agentic, a collective agentic layer that you put on top of a GPT, that you're calling a company, because you can actually even ask it to go form a company and go register a company on Stripe Atlas or just directly with a state agency, and it can create their own little company, right? Everything created by that is a collective work of you. Because you still, if you go back in the chain, set up that initial prompt, set up that initial inference, right? You were the one who initially created this. I mean, and they would point to things, they would look for analogy. So analogy would be any kind of derivative work situation where you have an initial artist and there's lots of derivative works or a collection that is made from those. They would point to artists who engage in biological art, where they incorporate fungi and let them grow. And they didn't make the fungi grow. They didn't decide where they were going to grow. They didn't decide how many were going to grow. But there's beautiful, if you're on TikTok, you can see these beautiful fungi art. The human didn't do that, but they did. They made the initial decision to engage in fungi art, and they threw some stuff out there, or they put it outside, and then fungi art resulted. So I think there's always going to be a human that they can go back to in the chain of causation. Now, where we don't have clarity, and where I think there's more interesting legal issue, is you can't have a non-human as the author. So the author of the collected work is the human, but that copyright is going to be really thin, potentially, if it's challenged. It's going to be, maybe, based on the recent cases, just that initial prompting and inference input, that initial coding that you put in, and anything that isn't within the scope of that directly might be unowned in the public domain. And therefore, GPTs like Microsoft's Copilot say in the terms of service, oh, and by the way, if the Copyright Office ever challenges, or anyone ever challenges your IP rights in what you create with Copilot, we agree we're never going to enforce our potential rights in it. We'll just let you enforce your rights. Go at it. And so they're basically saying, we're just, we probably own something here, but we're just going to pretend like we don't for your sake. But the problem is your end customer, who's might be a big corporation, who's buying whatever work or app or tool from you, is wanting to know that they can resell it. And how much of it can they resell? And where's the real value? And people like me come in and we put values on these things in due diligence. And it's going to reduce the value of a lot of works if we can't say that the best part of the IP is something that you can sell or that you can block others from using and just copying. So that's where we are right now. It's a little bit fraught. Good question. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Nolan.
Nolan, I think you get a check mark too. You've been like hitting it out of the park. Okay. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, wouldn't that kind of make everything public domain? Well, I just think about like marketing, like a lot of marketing is just like copy and paste, right? Like
That's so he's asking if all marketing that's copy and pasted is in the public domain, and it actually is not. It's unauthorized derivative work, possibly, likely infringing work, that if someone who owned the original work could show and wanted to enforce that against you, they could. They could send you a cease and desist letter or a demand letter asking for an immediate infringement payment from you, and then you could fight that out.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about in terms of like creating new work.
Yeah.
Like everything's kind of like a derivative
Oh.
of something that came before it anyway.
Can I cut you off? Nolan is a philosopher, guys, and gals online and gals in the room. So Nolan is saying, isn't everything copied? Aren't humans GPTs? We're just LLMs. We don't know anything. It's just a collection of other people's works and inputs in our brains that we mash together in new ways. It's all derivative. And I agree with you to a certain extent, but I have seen true creativity out of humans before where it's very difficult to show the attribution. And where was I going to go around with this? So yeah, I think that's bogus because we actually have had objective leaps forward in human civilization in your lifetime. CRISPR, we didn't have that knowledge before. We didn't have the genome index. Like the science and like the methods that we use for doing certain things are truly novel. Hence, welcome to patent world, where everything that is novel is defined as such and proven as such and hammered as such by the patent office and then in court.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can actually do new things as humans. Yeah.
Oh.
I'm going to pause you because I want you to sit in that feeling of frustration until you clarify your statement and give me something clearer, and then I will respond to it while this gentleman talks to me. Go ahead.
My question is kind of on some.
You have to give me your name.
Ari.
Oh yeah. Okay, go ahead, Arya. My bad. My
It's
bad.
kind of like expanding on Nolan's point a bit, where I think
Uh-oh.
we
Another philosopher.
we
Let's go.
Like we are our work are derivative of previous work, so we put in the work to like make the connection, and like the creativity is kind of our work in that we found like different ideas, and then we put in the work to connect them together. However, when you ask it like a generative AI model to do that, like for example, you're saying like.
All right, so we're talking about whether human derivative works are transformative enough to be considered new works. I'm talking to the audience who might be watching, and in the future. So, and he's saying like there's a point at which it's transformative enough that it's new, and there's a point at which it's just derivative. And that actually is defined by law, so kudos to you for just divining that from your own logic. But you're saying now that GPTs,
So
LLM, go ahead.
GPT is like, okay, for an example, if you ask like ChatGPT to make a painting in the style of Leonardo da Vinci or something,
He's saying about making a painting in the style of Leonardo da Vinci, asking a GPT to do that. It will.
it's the large language model is putting in the work to like.
The LLM
adapt
puts in that
it,
work.
And like the creator is not. So
Creator is not putting in that work. So
is how would you define the like morality or legality between like, because it's not the same as.
he's asking me to define morality. I'm so honored. I'm not here to define morality for an entire group of diverse people. But what is the legality? Where is the line of, clarify your question.
I guess where would you draw the line between like what the difference is between being inspired by a previous work and creating something out of it yourself and using an LLM to kind of speed run the process?
So both, actually the analysis is not that different as far as whether the output of your creativity that is, or the LLM's creativity that is inspired by something else, is or is not an infringement of that prior author's work, or is sufficiently transformative enough for it to be new and yours, with or without any derivative work elements that would still potentially have to be licensed from that other artist. And there's a substantiality test there for the transformativeness. There are other elements in addition to transformation, and there also are elements of commentary, of parody, of that we'll actually have exemptions and carve-outs for the derivative maker so that they can do those types of things and push human civilization forward by referencing but not siphoning the goodwill and the market value too much of the original work by making comment on society using that work or on that work itself or the author of that work. All those things can actually be protectable and considered, as a result, transformative enough. And then beyond that, a lot of that decision making happens based upon whether the artist themselves, the original author themselves, decides it's worth enforcing their rights. They perceive you have stolen or not. And if they think that, they go to an attorney, they're like upset. You or your LLM have clearly been inspired by their key work, and they should have to pay you a licensing fee for the full license of your work value or the elements, the thin elements of their original work that you did borrow that are recognizable. And their attorney is going to walk them through how good their case is, what elements are strong, which are not. They're going to decide how much it's worth. And honestly, the economics of that decision making often defines whether or not it's transformative enough, right, in practicality. Because that artist is either going to say it's worth it or it's not because of the value of how big your thing is, how much, almost like trademark, like how much you're siphoning goodwill from them, which is trademark, the recognizability of what you did, and sometimes has an effect. But just the straight law of it, where both sides are very rich and can afford to fight, would be often come down to like a substantial amount. What amount of their work did you copy? How transformative was your work from any of those elements that you copied? And was the value of your work, the creativity of your work, directly reliant upon their key elements of the material elements of their work? Or, so for instance, if you took 5 pixels from the Mona Lisa, which is not under copyright anywhere because copyright only lasts, well, the last I checked, yeah, it used to be 72 years after the death of the author, but it's longer now because of Disney. Anyway, so yeah, so it keeps getting longer. But effectively, let's say a lifetime times 2 of the author, and then a business has like 96 years, I think now. I might get that wrong. But anyway, so around a lifetime of use for a business, right? And businesses don't often live longer than 96 years, so that's a long time. That's the duration. And so, but let's imagine that the Mona Lisa was recently created, is under copyright. If you took like 6 pixels from the corner of it, that wouldn't be the substantial, that wouldn't be the recognizable part, that wouldn't be a substantial or materially substantial amount. And then if you took those and like arranged them in a totally different way, that would be a highly transformative way of presenting it. And so this is kind of copyright 101 rather than AI law per se, but this is what AIs do, right? They take elements and they try to predict which other elements are going to be aligned with that, whether on an image or in a series of text or music. And so it is almost the way they work is very conducive to copyright case analysis, actually, if that makes sense. So I think there will be more and more clarity as more of these cases are resolved. And in fact, we've got one with the New York Times right now that doesn't really claim so much AI elements, but is on this copyright, like how much can you steal for an AI service delivery of their articles, and like what's substantial and what isn't, and how much is material, things like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. All right, we've got more questions. I'm going to go for you, sir, because you sat up front. Next time, sit closer to the front. Go ahead.
I was just curious, like, so going off of like the Ghibli example, I guess,
Mhm.
There's a lot of like features in like Ghibli animations that obviously like OpenAI, like the ChatGPT, like would copy over. So
Yeah.
I was curious, like, basically in improving that, it would probably be more of like like I was wondering if there's like a more quantitative way versus like a, or more, quantitative
Objective.
way or qualitative way
Yeah.
to like prove that, and through like if like certain algorithms would like analysis of algorithms would be permissible in a court case, or even like AI itself like going through and like defining what how much overlap there is, I guess.
What's your name?
Ben.
Ben. We've definitely met before, Ben, I
Yeah.
think. Okay, so Ben asked, we have the Studio Ghibli case forming where, so many people are borrowing that style directly or indirectly using these GPT-driven tools and getting visual outputs, or even now filmic outputs that replicate that studio's style. This seems like a very clear copyright test case. It's going to very likely be in one form or another, or maybe multiple forms. How do we come up with a better, more objective measure for that unauthorized derivative work infringement? And then he said, can we do AI versus AI grudge match, where the plaintiff side is using an AI to assess whether the AI tool overstepped its bounds to a material substantiality, to was it transformative enough, all the things that we've just been talking about. I think that's actually already started to happen. There are litigation-oriented IP tools that are being sold to law firms of size, and some of them are being deployed. And litigators will use any tool they can to try to win a case. And a lot of innovation happens in what litigators use in order to try to win a case that then gets adopted more widely by the legal community because it's tested and it wins, right? It works. It becomes almost precedential by use, if that makes sense. So yeah, yes is the answer. There's going to be, and in fact, this might become an era of making clear formulas more available because AI tools do that. They can give you a score of like the amount of infringement for certain types of works. And I actually think the whole field might even become much more objective and less subjective as a result. So I would make that prediction.
One tiny follow-up.
He has a follow-up.
So based on that, I guess, because I'm not I'm not super comfortable with like the legal system or how that works, but like
He's not comfortable with the legal system.
A judge would like make that like decision as opposed to like it crossing a certain threshold of like, let's just say you scored like an 89 or like let's say a 95 out of like 100 on like the overlap score. And
You've
then,
got like an A+ for infringement.
there's like
What do you do now?
There's like a 90, like there's not like a cutoff where like if you're above a 90%, then this is confirmed. Like it would
So
be a
he's
judge that
he's
decides.
asking if we could get to a point where an objective tool that is widely adopted and considered precedential and accepted by the judiciary could potentially start creating a value at which is a break point of clear infringement that wins your case. Sure, absolutely, that could be possible. Because again, we love precedents, we love objectivity, we love, in the legal field, we love that. That'd be great. And in fact, what would happen is that if we got to that stage, it would be wonderful because we could just start settling most of these cases outside of court. Because if you run your client's, your client is a defendant, you run it through one of these tools, you see their score, you say, we're not going to win this one. It's going to be really hard. We could come up with a novel argument, but we'll have to spend a lot of money doing it. Do you want to spend a lot of money doing that, or do you want to spend your money drafting a settlement and negotiating that? And that's probably where we could go. I would make that prediction. Thank you very much, Ben. Good sir, in the back.
Yeah, so
What's your name?
RV.
RV. Arveen. We have met.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, Arveen. And I think it's Arveen. I'm so sorry. I just did that phonetically and that was wrong. Arveen, yes sir.
It actually overlaps a little bit with Rurai.
Let's keep going.
So,
Which, by the way, I mean, this is officially over, so if anyone has to leave, you should. He had to leave. But I'm having fun, so I can stay for another 20 minutes maybe, max, but like, let's go. Arveen.
yeah, so I was going to ask about how like AI tools are being used in like your day-to-day law lifestyle because, I mean, yeah, it's in everything now, like you said, all
Yeah.
these agents are everywhere.
Yep.
So I would only assume that it is also being used as tools in the law.
Yeah.
But
So he asked how much the legal profession is using AI, where I see it in practice. And I mean, we've been using like autocomplete. I mean, that's AI. That's just not sexy AI. It's not agentic AI. It's not, I mean, but it is kind of generative AI. I mean, like, we've been using that for what, 10, 12 years now? So like, for any of us who are scared of this, like, this is pretty dumb. But to your point about an agentic or a true like generative complete creates the full document, creates the full legal strategy kind of idea. All of the major service providers of legal search and some that do some drafting or like forms creation from legal search have already adopted generative AI embedded tools. So like LexisNexis, Westlaw, I mean there's others, but like they rolled that out pretty fast. They could see the writing on the wall and they didn't want to lose customers. And if you're interested in law tech, Clio and some of the smaller ones, yeah, they also are on this. And then some of them will actually buy smaller startups to put you out of business or to incorporate your product offering into their suite of offerings more efficiently than having an in-house team develop that over time. So if that's of interest to you, there's definitely a market for that. I think that the valuations for the amount of effort you might put in that kind of business still aren't going to be as good as some other like B2B or consumer, because a lot of those companies, those big players that have the capital to buy you, may feel like they've already stabilized their user base in the last year and a half of like rollouts, and that they don't have as much risk to like competitively worry about. There's a lot of lock-in in the contracts they give us. They're like 3 to 5 year contracts. A lot of us have just re-signed up on those and are kind of locked in with them, and it would cost us hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million, to terminate those early. And so you would have to be doing something that is just market shifting and allow them to effectively cut down their workforce in a dramatic way, which is not always a fun thought, but the future in some cases, or that offers a service that all of us on the legal side really think we need to keep up and no one else is offering or everyone else is offering, either way, right? That,
I had a little bit of a follow-up.
yeah, here's a follow-up, folks. Let's do it.
So I hope I'm allowed to say this, but my dad
He's going to
is
say
at-
something
my dad's
controversial.
a senior director at FINRA, and
He's at FINRA.
project he's
Dad.
working on is he's trying to get a generative AI.
Yeah, this is going on the web. Do you want me to,
Bro, like, look behind you.
So
is it okay? Just,
I'm pretty sure it's okay.
yeah, everyone's concerned that he's going to give us a case study that is not ready for prime time. But
No, I'll just, okay, so if you repeat it, that's.
yeah, so if you don't want me to repeat your case study, I won't.
Just
Okay, so this next case study is not going to be about what I just talked about. It's going to be about something else.
No, it's kind
Wink,
of
wink.
an example, because I was going to say, so there's generative AI that needs to have confidential information. You put it into, they can't use ChatGPT, they can't
Right.
use all the
Proprietary on-prem or proprietary walled garden generative AI backend or data pools. Yeah.
Yeah, so they have a lot of regulations when it comes to that. And
Yes.
I'm speaking with these EU acts and all these executive orders. How does that fit in with certain AI tools that you guys are using?
As for us as lawyers, not the case where the government is also having to deal with it. So yeah, we very often law firms are requiring that the tools that we interact with give us a proprietary database so they can train their model, but then all of the live data that they pull from have to come from our data set and not share our data set with their larger pool. Or in theory, some might negotiate an anonymization of our data set. Our firm is very concerned about that because there's so much art in what we do that, we believe that some of our documents are industry leading and that it could be clear what transaction it was or that it was our work if something that is from our documents shows up, even anonymized in some general output. So we're very cautious about protecting the client privilege on what we've done. So some firms are actually trying to build their own proprietary tools in-house based upon their own data sets. It's hard because the training data is just not as much as it would be outside. I know I've had a conversation with founders who were trying to sell biomorphic neural net structure to firms because those would not require as much training data and still could potentially give us good outputs, but it's so expensive to build the neurons. And there's even, I think, some people watching who've tried to do this for other contexts and know like even to get like 130K of neurons built that are active is just, it's very time consuming and it's very costly to run the processing on that as like a startup. So we'll see, we might be a while from that. And we have such great output, or good enough output from the GPT LLM model that for the moment there's not a huge customer demand for something different for most use cases. But yeah, confidentiality of that data is really important, and that's why proprietary data set and like walled garden structures are being sold to clients that have that need. Yeah, Clio's there. I didn't mention them at first because honestly, they slipped my mind. They are not quite as large as those two. Those are like market leaders, but they're rising. And then Case something, I can't think of what it's called. But there's at least 4 or 5 that are like solid players that a lot of people use. Yeah, it's good. Hi. Yes. How are you?
I have like a more of a bigger picture question. I want
Yes.
to get your reaction to it.
I'm asking to react. I'm going to react. Let's do it.
Because you said you can sell the future, so.
I can see the. No, I said it's my job is to try.
Okay.
Right. I wish I could.
Like
Yeah.
the overall AI industry, I think of it like, for instance, like for airplanes, as an industry, like the margins are not great, but the product itself provides a lot of consumer surplus in the sense of like 100 years ago or 150 years ago, I wanted to travel, I'd be like on a boat, I could get sick, I couldn't make it, there could be shipwreck, there could be storm, but now it's like in 7 hours, I'm in a different country.
It's wild.
And so,
He's talking about how flight as a mode of human transportation is just amazing and wonderful and still exciting even now. And I agree.
but as an airline, you're not very profitable. They're not super profitable, margins are not great.
Margins aren't great, not super profitable. They can't afford a major overhaul of their system for a small incremental improvement or risk.
Yeah. And then also
So?
even like PCs, like they change the way we communicate and even operate in our homes. Like everyone has them, but like Acer is out of business. Like to be a PC.
Acer's out of business? I missed that.
Or Acer, it's not Acer. There's like a different Asus. Yeah. They're-
Asus, yeah.
Asus.
Yeah, sad. I have one. I have an old one. Loved it. It was
But,
good. Yeah.
Being a PC manufacturer provided a lot of surplus for the consumers, but as the person, as the company, you yourself were not a profit. And so I have this thought that I think that may
He's
be
giving
the
us
case.
economic theory in general and giving us cases from other industry segments, and he's getting to the question now, and I will try to get that to you guys, even though I cannot replicate his amazing masterclass. Go ahead.
But with DeepSeek, I think DeepSeek.
DeepSeek.
For me, I was like, okay, this can be done at a 80% for 20% of the cost.
80% of the output and the processing power for 20% of the cost with DeepSeek. What do we think is what the question is?
Yeah, I think I'm wondering like if we were to step back, like, do you think AI is along this path of it provided a lot of surplus for like me as a business?
A lot of
owner? I have
surplus
all
for the
this- I can
business
sell these
owner
tools,
with all these
I
tools.
can sell their software, but like
Can sell their
AI,
software.
The Meta, the companies that are actually producing these models.
But
moving forward, like right now, the
But
valuations are.
should they be more efficient in what they deliver to the consumer base, to the business base that doesn't need the full robust capability of these tools? And so they should create like less expensive to,
That, but then also their valuations. Do you think that that's
Oh,
are they going
the
to
valuations.
seeing some of the like airline, some of the PC, because it's almost like an arms race now. I don't even think about like the streaming
is the
stuff.
arms race going to lead to a rapid drop in valuation because they've overreached? They're flying too close to the sun with too much robust feature set that the market doesn't even want to pay for the extra surplus of, and so that it's inefficient, and that inefficiency turns into a rapid plummeting of value of those tools down to a baseline, like a floor of value, right, where the actual market is getting what it wants but without the surplus. The more competitors that enter the market, we know from economic theory that that is the case. Right now, it's pretty burdensome and expensive to enter that market on the back end, on the GPT level, right? Like, it's just the data is expensive. The regulatory uncertainty about where you got that data is expensive. The regulatory environment in general being frothy and potentially having a key element of how you built that back end becoming unlawful or more expensive regulatorily is expensive. And there aren't that many people who know how to build it well. And so labor is expensive to even just build these things right now. So all of that is coalescing, and it's so much less expensive for all of you to just build layers on top, to just build agents. And so it's like, this reminds me so much of the Facebook developer garage era, which is when Facebook was its interface was a lot more like marketplace across the board. Like you had a feed and you had a bunch of ads on either side, and people put in those ad blocks different apps. It was like going to a mall, and you could click on different apps and have your bookshelf right there, and you could have like your sales thing. And Facebook didn't build the apps. It just allowed it had an API, and all of you built all the apps that users could choose to load into their platform on the side. And during 2004 to 2009, that was how Facebook's user interface worked. And there were so many startups that were just like, we're not going to build another social network. We're going to build apps for the Facebook social network. And they made tons of money, and they fundraised on that. And then Facebook changed their UI. It was like, hey, thanks for validating what users want. Now we're just going to in-house build all that functionality and launch that and push all your apps to the background where it's harder for the users to find, and so you'll all die. And so there was but for a period of time, they were sponsoring Facebook developer garages, all major cities, sending reps out, like Mark Zuckerberg's sister. I can't think of her name right now. She was like out and about, like all over the country, Randy Zuckerberg, just like meeting people and like hyping up this. And so many people, and like in your situation, said, well, this is low-hanging fruit. I'm going to put my developer time on this ROI, higher ROI of like lower input in of time. I make an app for Facebook. I can go become like a millionaire, flip that company. A lot of people did that, but it just evaporates. And so I think the big risk here is also that all of your talent is going to go for that low-hanging fruit now. By creating all these agents, instead of trying to like say, what else can AI backends do? Do I need to have like an ungodly amount of data? That's the real question to me. The surplus is in the training data. I think training could be so much better. Inference could be so much better if all of us like put our brains on that. Like for a specific use case, do you need to go through so many cycles? Because you don't need, an agentic AI is basically saying, you've got all of human knowledge, but I'm going to try to filter you into just these certain functions. But why not, from pulling from all that data and knowledge, why not just pull a data set that's more relevant to the output of whatever agent you want, build that smaller backend, maybe even do some recursion on that so that you do multiple cycles on that data instead of having to just have more and more data. I'm just throwing this out there, guys and gals. But a lot of you are not going to do that because that's a lot harder and a lot riskier to do that kind of a thing than it is to just throw an agent company on top of these people. Ryan's like, and so that you're doing that because it's your first startup and you're in college and you need to break out and you need to make that first money, get your bag, and then you'll do your real startup that's going to like actually change the world. Okay, fine, but I'm just saying you might miss a big opportunity right now while all these companies don't have a foothold, have surplus. It's so expensive to run them. What if you came up with a lean, mean, smaller data set? And the agent on top would be so much smarter and better because you're not having to force it non-deterministically to actually do the dang job of being an SAT tutor instead of like also talking about groceries and jazz. Stop doing that because you don't put jazz or groceries in the data set, right? Credit me when one of you does this and like makes a lot of money. Yeah. Okay. Please come back and talk again. Not Nolan. Wait. Nolan. Yeah, Nolan. Thank you for talking again. Yes. I didn't mean to scare you off by telling you that you had to formalize your question, but have you?
Yeah, I was just gonna go cry. Honestly.
Yeah.
No, but like it's just like we're just talking about like specializing in the AI, right? Like,
Yeah.
Which is what.
You're kind of artificially doing that on the back end. How inefficient is that? Or not on the back end, on the front end. It's like you're running the entire corpus of human data through one very minimal use case. Why do that? Doesn't that inherently, as an engineer, bother you? Like, that's so much bloat, right? Okay, yes.
I guess people just like Maslow's hammer. Like doing one.
We're talking about Maslow's hammer. Yeah.
Basically, yeah. For many things, just use one.
Yeah.
tool.
Oh, and you're all like, well, I'll initially provide grocery listing, and then I'll also provide sewing instructions, and I'll just make an empire one by one off of my amazing, but you're not actually running the back end, and your back end, like the Facebook developer garage analogy, could be taken away from you by cost, going up and up and up, right? The gas fees on what you're paying right now monthly. I mean, any of you that are doing voice AI like integration, like it will go down for a while because there is competition and this stuff is getting more efficient. But I think it's going to bounce back up once a few players filter out. And if your whole business is based upon leveraging one of these back ends, and it could be just like the costs, you don't control those costs, man. Like you got to sell this company before they start going up. Yes.
Yes, that's actually the second part of my question.
We have another
It's like
question.
Right now we're like an arms race, I would say.
You are next, my dear. But he's gone. Yeah. Yeah, I can feel it.
Whereas like I compare it to like a streaming, like in the beginning everyone's prices were low, but now that Netflix is sort of taking the market lead, they can raise their prices without.
So we're looking at the streaming video as industry as an example of an analogy of what could happen for the cost of running a back-end GPT to drive your agent.
Well, more so in the sense of like if you're beholden to like a OpenAI, a Anthropic, right now their cost $20 a month for the Pro. Okay, but like if in 5 years there's only those two players and they raise their cost to 50 a month, 100 a month.
50 a month, 100 a month, right? And again, I think it's going to go lower in the short run. It's actually the costs are going to go down and down and down as like everyone is competing. But there is a point at which the market, filters out for who's going to be the winners, and the barrier to entry to create these is just going to be so expensive. It's going to be hard for new players to come in quickly, and so costs should go up. We know this from economics, right? It's macroeconomics. Oh wait, you gotta wait. Takia. Takaya.
You're good. My question is, so like for those that are not super techy, like me,
For those who aren't super techie, like
I'm more
like
business,
she's a business person. Yeah.
How do we capitalize off of like what's happening in the other than like linking up with the super tech guy?
So how does a business-minded entrepreneurial person who can't program
Yeah, I don't really want
or doesn't have time,
Yeah,
it's
don't
just
wanna do that.
she doesn't want to do it. How does she capitalize on this? The efficiencies for getting a lot of stuff done in your business.
I use Chatty all the time.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's more so like how, like, I still think AI has such a, like, it's just a growing market.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we're capitalizing on this market as well, even though we might not have all the developers super
Yeah.
savvy?
Well, the cool thing is that like the kind of like low code, no code movement for just like web development is sort of already exponentially increased in this market too. So there are different platforms that, I mean, developing for this is like a new world, right? Even some of the developers are like, this is hard because it's not like traditional development. So there's almost like a leveling of the playing field to a certain extent there. But yeah, you'd have to have one of these platforms that you feel comfortable with to like actually like update code and even just copy and paste it from a GPT into your code base to make an app. But now we also have other platforms that are kind of doing low code for this space. So if you want to make an agentic AI that does something that then you sell to other consumers, you could do that as a non-developer now. You're just going to have an extra layer of monthly subscription that you have to pay compared to your competitors until you get to a point that you've validated that the users that you have actually want that service and get some revenue in, and then either use that revenue or investment to then team up with that developer who's going to help you build that middle layer so that you don't have to rely upon a platform that's charging you an extra fee. Does that? Yeah. And I think also that we need the business minds because there are solutions that you're going to come up with because you're closest to the end customer. You kind of know your communities of customers, and you're going to see what actually needs to be built, in some cases as faster than the engineers, and have an opportunity to leap ahead and create like a really great business, even with that extra layer, because nobody else is serving that well. Because it's just engineers thinking about what they run into, and they are not in your specific customer community, potentially. So yeah, don't count yourself out. Yeah. Other questions? We've got some alumni in the house. Not hearing any. You had a follow-up question?
Question maybe, but
and it kind of relates to the topic you were talking about, which is that like the business like minded principle. I guess what I'm thinking about is if there's potentially a monopoly where it's like not where it's like with gas. It's like they can't just raise it to like $7 a gallon just because they want to, right? Because it's like there's enough
Competition.
that's not the best metaphor, but whatever. It's like
Yeah.
in business in general, someone's going to fill that spot in the market, which is like, if it's too expensive, great, let's create a company, let's offer it for cheaper, right? So then that's a whole, market of, you see it with like cellular companies or whatever. It's like,
Yeah. So no one's talking about like highly competitive markets and how that actually on their own maintain a price margin or a price band
Right.
that it's very difficult to go above or below in some cases. So yeah, unless you have a tool or a regime of tools that makes you wildly more efficient so that your costs are lower, which is what a lot of industry players hope these AI tools will do. That they will figure out the way to implement them internally or externally, and that gives them great efficiency on costs that they can then pass along as savings to customers and gobble up a lot of customers that they otherwise wouldn't have in the market.
But according to what you were saying before, you were saying like the cost to entry into that is so high that it potentially could be problematic.
If you're going to try to build your own GPT or biomorphic neural net or any other type of AI backend architecture, that you then have to get large sets of data or really refined data to train. So if the data is expensive and the backend to build is expensive, and then the processing that you need as you scale is expensive, it just makes it to be fast. It makes it more difficult for you to break in on that end. And that's why I think a lot of folks are just they're saying, oh, I can't build like a global GPT competitor. And I was just saying, well, don't build a global GPT competitor, build a very niche specific use case GPT competitor, and maybe use less autonomous data. I mean, again, we have to train it with enough that it has like a semantic understanding, or it has like the replication of a human semantic understanding. But I think, if nothing else, this is a gold pan opportunity. Like if you could create the data sets where it's like, if you want to build a GPT to solve this problem, that is a better insurance broker, let's say something that you guys care about, that does a better, again, tutoring, right? Like tutoring. And you could say, if you're anybody out there who wants to build a tutoring GPT, I've got your verbal communication, humanoid, English speaker, data cluster. I've got your verbal slang cluster for vocalization so that it doesn't just list off things, but it actually sounds like it's talking to you. I've got your subject matter for the subjects that you might want to teach. You buy whatever clusters of data you need, or you say, we want to solve this problem, one of these 6 problems, and we tell you, here are the like verticals of data that we'll put in the bundle for you that you then use to train your GPT, and you buy that, you license that from us. I mean, that could be I just created a business model, right? If that works. And I think there's like an opportunity in that kind of arena. Yeah.
Whereas it's not consumer and business, it's like, that would be.
It's like a dev tools almost, like what I'm describing, but that's like selling gold pans to the miners and pickaxes to the miners,
That's like, I've heard that expression, like the people who really made out in the gold rush were the people who sold
Yeah.
the pans because it's how many people really found the gold.
Right now, it's low cost enough, and it probably will be for the next 2 years, to be an agentic developer and not have to do all that back end on your own. But the moment that it seems like you might want to have more control over the output, you want a more stable agent, your use case is so refined, and it just isn't, you're not getting the output easily from your engineering of your globalized GPT backend. What I'm describing could solve the problem of like too much creep in like how it behaves and its output. It could solve the problem of the cost of training data. And then there's going to be all these people who are going to be, it'll be financially to their incentive to look into, well, can I just build my own backend and maybe just make it more efficient than the current ones and still get as good or close to or good enough? Going to your earlier question, like some of these, like a tutor is hard because you want it to talk to you, but like if you're doing a business process, it doesn't have to verbalize with you. It just needs to do consistently a good job on that process and maybe make a couple of decisions like a human. It might not even have to be that smart. I mean, it's artificial intelligence, but it's kind of artificial stupidity, right? Like it just needs to be artificial, like
Limits on how smart it is.
yeah, it just needs to be able to do certain things really well and really efficiently and smart. And like, I just think there's a ton. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's just so many things, like layers underneath. Like, omnibus, we want to control the world. You can build anything on top of it that you guys could go in. And like, we have to build all of that still. Someone's got to do it. Someone is going to do it when there's a financial incentive to do it. So it's just a lot of opportunity right now. And I haven't even talked about the biomorphic. I've just teased you with that. Because none of what we're talking about in GPT, in my opinion, these LLM-driven ones, is even intelligence. This is all marketing. It's not making real decisions. They even acknowledge this when they roll out the latest version and they do all the testing to see if it's actually thinking and making real judgment. It's not. But we could actually architect the neural net so that they don't have to replicate humans, but they could. But like the architecture, right? And like actually have a thinking machine. And that's still a complete open arena for somebody to go and like plant a flag in there. And it's definitely coming. So yeah.
Because you gotta monetize it. Well, that's like
Yeah.
always gonna be part of the motivation,
Yeah.
even though you want that not to be the case.
Yeah. Well, you got to get grants. You got to build a great team that can get grants, hopefully non-dilutive grants, to do something like that, or build like a baby model that wins one of these prizes that gives you like non-dilutive grant money, and then you can go build a research team, but don't do that through a university if you can help it, so that you can own your IP more clearly. We could talk about that if you're actually on that pathway. I would love to like help somebody like do that. But other questions? We have some time that we have to do after this. Good, Sarah, thanks for coming out. I love the philosophy. I love the like mini econ lecture. I love the philosophy over here, you know. Anything else? You didn't speak at all?
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Sure.
It's ominous and exciting, both at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yes, sir.
Comment on like creative
Yes.
art, because I think I would consider myself a creative, and I would say the one difference that I've found is that when like my relationship is with the piece first and then the audience,
Right.
whereas AI thinks about the audience in order to create the
Oh, we just got some like proverb thrown down on us. So I think he says, I'm an artist and I think about the piece first and then the audience, and the AI thinks about the audience and then creates the piece. And that is, yeah, for sure. Where do you want to go with that? That's just it. End scene. Thanks so much, you guys, for coming out. Yeah, always a pleasure. Always, we even got some people clapping with the sides, like, yeah!